The 2024 Genesis GV60 doesn't have a slew of new updates or options, but it is still a viable alternative to the Tesla Model Y. It's a technological tour de force for Hyundai Motor Group and is one of our favorite EVs. Let's take this Atacama Copper example out and see if the Genesis GV60 is still as charming as we remember. The 2024 Genesis GV60 Performance all-wheel drive comes with a 77.4 kilowatt-hour battery pack that can be charged from 10% to 80% in just 18 minutes. The dual motors produce a combined 483 horsepower in boost mode and a 0 to 60 mile per hour time in less than 4 seconds. The performance trim that we're testing has an EPA estimated range of just 235 miles, but lower trim models can go as far as 294 miles. Of course, you don't get all the performance goodies with the other models. Let's begin the exterior tour of the GV60 up front with the badge. The Genesis logo is adorned by 2 wings, and this wing triangle motif is something you'll see throughout both the inside and outside of the GV60. One of the places you'll notice it right away is the triangle that houses the front camera on top of this massive grille that's not strictly necessary on an EV, but mimics what you'll see on the gas-powered Genesis vehicles. Also fleet-wide is these quad beam headlights that have a body-colored trim piece down the middle. They're LED and have a very unique signature at night, so you'll know that it's a Genesis coming at you. Around the side, this performance version has a set of 21-inch chrome alloy wheels. The standard car comes with 19s, but this chrome motif that you'll see here is also carried along the top trim of the vehicle all the way back to the rear hatch. On the passenger side door, you'll see that the door handles are mounted flush. That's for aerodynamic efficiency, but when you unlock it, it'll pop open so you can use them. How this works in the winter, and we haven't seen too many complaints. I've seen some Teslas have the issue, but I haven't heard of any Genesis models having a problem with the door handles freezing. As you move farther back, we have the charging door, which is power operated, and you'll see inside that there is a CCS charging port with this really kind of annoying little plastic piece. I prefer the doors that flip open, but this CCS port will soon be replaced with a Tesla NACS or a J3400 plug here in the near future because Genesis has pledged their support of that standard. And then finally, sort of around the rear are the taillights. Again, this is a wing sort of design, and it is a split beam design just like the front, to mimic that in the rear, and when the rear light profile at night does make it look like a set of wings flying down the road. Before I open the rear cargo area of the GV60, I'd like to point out that it doesn't have a rear windscreen wiper. Now, some 2025 HMG products do have that added, and we do hope that Genesis adds it for the next model year. As I open the rear hatch, I'd like to point out that this is one of the tallest opening rear hatches I think I've ever seen on an SUV. It actually almost hit my garage door at home, which is extremely rare. But once it's open, it exposes 24 cubic feet of cargo space with the rear seats folded up. If you were to fold those rear seats down, you have a little over 54 cubic feet for your stuff and things. The front seats of the GV60 are a pretty nice place to be, but there's a few things that I'd really like to highlight. First, this ash Napa leather interior is really nice to look at, though it does collect a little bit more dirt than I'd like. But I would really like to applaud Genesis for not using gloss black for all of the control surfaces. This aluminum motif is much more scratch resistant and just better looking than gloss black. Yes, gloss black looks good in photos, but when you live with the car for a little while, it just starts looking kind of trashy. To control the gear shift, though, it's very unique on the GV60. There is this round sort of crystal ball here that just looks like a crystal ball when it's off, but when you power the ignition on, it will actually flip over, exposing the control interface to put it in drive, neutral, reverse, park, etc. In front of that is a control dial for the infotainment system, but one other nice thing is you can control that 12.3-inch screen with your fingers as well. It supports both Android Auto and Apple CarPlay, though you do need a cord in order to connect them. It's nice to see it though, because GM is doing away with CarPlay and Android Auto altogether. This system also controls a Bang & Olufsen premium sound system with some really kind of unique ways to control it. There is no sort of like bass and treble tone control. You choose whether the music's based on the kind of the mood. Like, is it exciting? Is it dramatic? Like, it's really kind of weird, but once you figure it out, it sounds pretty good. One thing that's not complicated, though, is the customization of this entire system. There are buttons both on the steering wheel and down below the climate control that you can program for things like activating CarPlay, accepting or rejecting a phone call, or pulling up the EV menu. You can even have it enable the VGS function, which we'll talk about in a second after we explore the rear seat room of the GV60. I have the driver's seat set to my preferred driving position, and I have an okay amount of leg and knee room. I'd have a few more inches if I were in some other E-GMP cars, but for short to medium range trips, this is perfectly fine for me. Now, I'm 5'10". Also, an okay amount of headroom. One thing I do like is this airplane-inspired seat back pocket. This is probably nicer than you get on most Delta business class seats, and is just a good place to store your stuff. Rounding out sort of, though, this back seat comfort is both of these exterior seats are heated, which is extra nice in the winter. I'm back up front in the GV60 Performance to talk about a new feature for 2024 called VGS. Short for virtual gear shifting, Genesis has added the software capability for this car to simulate an 8-speed dual-clutch transmission while you're driving along down the road. Similar to that in the Hyundai Ioniq 5N, which, if you want to see how that works, click the pop-out window above or the description box link below to see my first drive review of that. But basically, it simulates a sports car. Now, it's not as extreme in here as it is in the Ioniq 5N, but Genesis claims it does add more to the driving excitement. When you enable the system, which I've set through a shortcut button on the steering wheel, you can actually start to hear an engine noise emanate from outside the vehicle through the external speakers. And even though we're in park, I can sit and actually rev the engine, and it sounds like a sports car. Now, does that mean it'll drive more like a sports car? Let's take this out on the road and find out. Out and about in the GV60 Performance, you quickly realize that the base performance over 400 horsepower is really more than enough for your day-to-day driving. And with the push of the boost button on the steering wheel, you get nearly 500 horsepower for 10 seconds, which is plenty. At any traffic light, you're likely going to be the quickest accelerating car there. One interesting thing that Genesis has added to the GV60 for 2024 is something called VGS, or virtual gear shift. It's something we showed you before I climbed into the car, but while you're driving, you can enable it with a push of a button, and suddenly you are driving an automatic transmission. You can pull paddle and you can downshift, you can upshift, it will hit a rev limiter, a virtual rev limiter. It's very similar to the experience in the Hyundai Ioniq 5N, though it isn't quite as extreme. So the shifts aren't quite as brutal even in sport mode, and it's not nearly as, I guess, gnarly of an experience. This is kind of like the tame older brother or tame older cousin to sort of the redheaded stepchild of the Ioniq 5N. What this does, though, is does give us hope that when Genesis introduces the higher horsepower Magma version, maybe later this year, early next year, it will have more of the raucous feel of the Ioniq 5N. Outside of that functionality, the Genesis GV60 drives great. All E-GMP cars drive pretty well. Steering is direct, pretty devoid of feel, but definitely very direct. Acceleration, as I said, is excellent. Ride quality is solid for a luxury car. It errs a little bit more on the sporty side compared to, let's say, an electrified GV70, but the adaptive dampers do go from a soft setting for comfort normal driving to a much more stiff setting for backroad canyon carving, things like that. At highway speed, not a lot of wind noise, as you'd expect from a luxury car. Not a lot of wind noise from the wing mirrors and stuff either. And visibility, honestly, is pretty excellent out of most views. The rear view is split a little bit just because the way the glass and the rear wing work out, but overall, an excellent sort of confidence-inspiring car to drive. Plenty of safety features are on tap. All of these come as standard, which is nice, including level 2 ADAS with a fairly good lane centering, Highway Drive Assist 2.0, which allows you to do lane changes on the highway assisted, and just really kind of, all of the safety features there obviously help make longer commutes even more enjoyable. If I were to nitpick, my biggest probably complaint would actually be the seating position. As low as I get this driver's seat, I still would like it to go a little bit lower. Now, I know Genesis markets this as a crossover, and I suppose technically that's the case, and crossover buyers want the higher seat. But I think that in a sportier car or in a more performance-oriented car like this GV60 Performance, I'd like the seat to be a little bit lower. Other than that, I'd like a little bit more range. This is an excellent car to drive, just like all the E-GMP cars are excellent in their own unique kind of way. This definitely feels like a Genesis, where an Ioniq 5 or an Ioniq 6 definitely feel like Hyundais, and Kia has its own little tuning to it. But regardless of sort of which way you go, the E-GMP cars are still quite the marvel, even though they're now a couple of years old. The Genesis GV60 starts at $53,350 with delivery for the rear drive version and 294 miles of range. Our performance version starts at $70,900 with delivery. Our test car has Atacama copper paint, which retails for $575. Our window sticker quotes an $11.95 delivery charge, but the Genesis website lists $13.50. Per our Monroney, our car rings in at $71,320. But interestingly, the Atacama paint is not an option on the build and price tool, at least at the time of recording. The Genesis GV60 is an excellent performance car from a luxury brand that is absolutely crushing it in the EV space. With the addition of VGS for 2024, the car is even more fun to drive. Plus, it gives us a taste of what we could expect from an upcoming Magma high-performance version of this very car. The Genesis GV60 not only accelerates quickly, but it charges quickly too. How fast? We find out with the EV Pulse Charging Challenge. You can watch that by clicking the on-screen link right over here.